Good morning, everybody. Barry Jones with SP History. I didn't anticipate another episode this week, but this is an addendum to yesterday. So this will actually be part of chapter 41. Um, those of you that stuck with me for 2 hours yesterday, I was getting kind of tired towards the end and I skipped a couple things, went back and re-listened to it, thought, man, to complete this picture, I really need to fill in a couple of these gaps. We were talking about LBJ and mainly at the end, the motive, the means, and the opportunity, and the payoffs. And that's why I want a quick review today. It won't be a long one, but I just want to fill in some of those gaps. I had forgotten a couple names, and I wanted to insert those names today as well. So we begin with motive, and some of this I'll breeze through because I did cover a lot of it, and I'm just looking to recover the stuff I skipped over. So uh, with respect to motive and LBJ's involvement in the JFK assassination, there's just so much motive. And first of all, from a political standpoint, he was about to be replaced on the 64 ticket. And that is corroborated by statements that JFK made to Evelyn Lincoln, his personal secretary, at which time he told her he was thinking about replacing him. But was going to wait on the announcement until the convention. When she pressed him on it, he said, well, at this time, I'm thinking about Governor Terry Stanford of North Carolina, but it will not be Lyndon. So it was unequivocal that he was going to be replaced. So that from a political standpoint, and this concerned more than just LBJ, this concerned all of the plotters involved in this deep state plot because uh, we've been going through all the different uh, elements, like the CIA, the Pentagon. We'll get to the Secret Service. We'll talk about the big oil people, LBJ. Uh, we'll get to the Cubans, the mafia. But they all had their reasons to not like JFK. They all had their reasons to want to get rid of him. And uh, when it when it was apparent that LBJ was going to be replaced on the ticket, it was pretty transparent what JFK was trying to set up. Normally the vice president is the heir apparent. So you think, well, if we can just suck it up with Kennedy for another year and a half, or if he wins re-election another 5 years, then LBJ will be the heir apparent. But if he's going to be replaced on the ticket, and the suspicion was he was going to pick somebody who was a placeholder only, nobody with political ambition, kind of like Dick Cheney was put on the ticket with George H.W. Bush. No one ever doubted that Cheney was not going to run for president. He was just there to help Bush. Well, that's what Kennedy was looking for, somebody to help him win the 64 election. That's it. He was not, had no political ambitions past that. Why? Because he was setting it up for his brother, Bobby, in 68, and eventually for his younger brother, Teddy, in 76. So what they were facing was a Kennedy dynasty. There was this deep bench of Kennedys, and they were setting it up, almost like Daddy Joe was still alive behind the scenes, pulling the strings like Geppetto. Only in this case, it's Jack who's doing it. So if you don't interrupt this in some sort of dramatic fashion, you're going to be stuck with a Kennedy for the next 24 years. This doesn't just affect LBJ. This affects all the sweet eight effers that we've been talking about. It affects the CIA, who's at war with the Kennedys. It affects the Pentagon, who wants a war with Vietnam. Kennedy won't give it to them. It affects the mob that who have been double crossed and are being chased around the country by Bobby. Now, if Bobby ends up being the heir apparent, they're going to have to deal with him uh, for the next, 16, whatever, 20 years, whatever. So it affects the policy with Cuba as far as the Cubans are concerned. Kennedy's trying to make nice with Castro. They don't want that. They want Castro overthrown. I could go on and on. The big oil people that want the tax breaks, they want the oil depletion allowance to stay. They don't want a Kennedy Act. It affects them, their bottom line. They all think they're weak against communism. If Jack's weak, Bobby's weaker. If Bobby's weaker, Teddy's going to be positively, he might as well just be a communist. So I can go on and on, but all of these parts, these moving parts within this conspiracy, in this deep state treasonous cabal, have their separate motives for wanting to interrupt this design on a Kennedy dynasty. Um, so we were talking about the legal issues that LBJ had. And as long as Kennedy's president, that means Bobby's going to be attorney general, which means LBJ is going to continue to have these legal problems, especially as long as he's on the ticket. Now, once he's off the ticket, under the pretext of these legal issues, then he's facing jail time. So we found out that, on the very day JFK was assassinated, Don Reynolds was testifying before a Senate Rules Committee, giving them testimony and documents showing that LBJ was demanding kickbacks on a life insurance dating back to 1957, and testimony that he had seen a suitcase full of money with $100,000 cash in it from General Dynamics, a bribe for Johnson's role in securing that TFX contract for General Dynamics. Phil Brennan said that he had gotten the word, others had gotten the word in D.C. from Bobby himself that it was now open season on LBJ. They had sort of protected LBJ in order to protect JFK. But now Bobby has a destroy LBJ plan, and so it's now okay. It's time to go after LBJ because we're getting close to the 64 election. So that means, as far as LBJ was concerned, politically, his goose was cooked. And if his goose is cooked and he is the golden goose, the sweet eight effers, that means all of their gooses are cooked too. They're not going to be feeding off that cash spigot anymore, and they don't have the the power. They're no longer the power behind the throne. He's not going to. Their golden goose isn't going to be president, which means all of their rackets are going to be shut down. And we saw where there were several prominent publications that were just on the verge of exposing LBJ. Drew Pearson had a column ready, submitted it on the 24th, then pulled it. And it was going to talk about the General Dynamics contract, the bribe. Life magazine had a huge expose, which, according to James Wagenvord, who was in charge of it, he says this publication would have finished Johnson. And not only politically, he would have been off the 64 ticket, but he would have been facing prison time. But as soon as Kennedy died, according to Wagenvord, all the copies were gathered up by my boss. All the research files and the print ready draft, everything was gathered up by his boss and shredded. And in place, instead of Life magazine publishing an expose on LBJ that weekend, it published the still frames of the Zapruder film, carefully transposing several of the key frames to make it look like JFK had been hit from a shot from behind, so as to further the lone gunman narrative. So you see what happened. Remember, the ultravirus is about doing everything in your own best interest for your own profit, for your own benefit, and you don't care about public interest. And in the end, what you do is you immunize yourself so you never face accountability. But here's the immunity. LBJ escapes accountability because he ascends to the throne, becomes the president. That's the only reason. Nobody wanted to mess with him then. He was the king. And in the place of accountability for LBJ, they shift the blame, they divert the blame to a patsy. And Life magazine was a big part of that. So, and it didn't stop with just the publications ending. All the investigations in the Senate, as soon as word reached the Senate, what happened in Dallas, they delayed any continuation of the investigation, and then eventually they dropped it. So the Billy Celestis / Bobby Baker scandal that was rapidly growing, soon to envelope and consume LBJ, was gone, just evaporated into thin air. So, but none of that happens if he doesn't become president. As long as he's vice president, if it goes another week, just one more week, that's all it would have taken. And so the timing was crucial. in this. So there's no question he had a political motive and he had a legal motive. And not just him, but the Sweet Eight effers had motive because they want him to be president as badly as he wants to be president. They have a lot of money on the line. The big oil people want him to be president as badly as he wants to be president. The CIA wants JFK out as badly as LBJ wants in. The Pentagon wants JFK out as badly as LBJ wants. I mean, I could go on down the list, right? So all of these moving parts come together in Dallas. And on that date, when it was absolutely sort of, they were really pushing it time wise. They almost didn't make it in time. As far as means and opportunity, we talked about that party at the Murchison estate, these two witnesses, that there was a party. A lot of people want to say that never happened. You know, I tend to believe these witnesses who have something to lose and oftentimes do lose something. I, I get so weary of all the people that say, well, if there's not a document that proves that this happened or that happened, and it didn't happen. And I get so weary of that because think about who's producing those documents. It's the CIA, it's the FBI, it's the government. They're the ones producing all these. They're government documents, and so that means we've seen so many opportunities, or so many times, so many examples where the CIA lied, deceived, withheld, suppressed, manufactured. So if they could do that with other evidence, could they not also do that with documents? It's just garbage in, garbage out. You're relying on the very agency that lies for a living. It deceives for a living. That's what they do to provide us with the truth. I just, it blows my mind. Same thing with the FBI. And then if there is a document that uh, they'll withhold it or redact it for years and years and years. They fight it. They don't want to release it. When they do release it, they have uh, built-in explanations. They practice this limited hangout plot, or they'll drip 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 a little bit of the truth, but conceal the larger truth. I mean, they have so many tactics to deceive. And if you're always waiting on the CIA to release a document or the FBI to release a document, if you're always relying on the government to tell you the truth about what the government did, because what we're finding out is that the main conspirators in this are government actors. LBJ is the vice president. We haven't talked about the Secret Service yet. That is a government actor. The CIA is a government actor. The Pentagon is a government actor. I am way more sympathetic to these eyewitnesses who have everything to lose and nothing to gain, who in some cases struggle with their memory, but try their best to remember what happened, who struggle with fear because they see what's happening to other witnesses. When they do come forward, I put a lot of weight in what they say. They have nothing to gain. They're not hiding anything. May Newman had nothing to gain by corroborating Madeline Brown's testimony that that party existed, that it happened. But oftentimes what happens is that they get one little detail wrong, or if their memory doesn't serve them right in 100% of the accounting of it, they get trashed by researchers, by us. You know, they're doing us a favor. They're helping us the best they can. They want to get to the truth. In many cases, it's taken years for them to summon up the courage to, and then if they don't get one detail right, we say, well, they've been debunked. That's our favorite term. I just don't have much uh, tolerance for the quick debunk. And, I noticed a lot of the witnesses who get debunked right off the bat are women. They're female. It's just unbelievable how many of them get debunked because they get a detail wrong. And yet they showed tremendous courage in coming forward. And sometimes you run in, you have to be discriminating. You have to figure out who's lying, who's making stuff up, who's exaggerating. But there's some that are telling the truth. And to just throw them all out, the baby with the bathwater, because the story doesn't fit a researcher's narrative or this narrative or that. It's just, to me, it's disingenuous. So I put a lot of stock in what May Newman said. I put a lot of stock in Madeline Brown. Yeah, she was a prostitute. Does that mean she didn't have eyesight? Does that mean she didn't have ears? Does that mean she wasn't there? Mae Newman wasn't educated. You listen to her talk, it's clear she wasn't educated. She was a domestic servant, and she communicates differently. But that doesn't mean her testimony is any less credible. And they both said there was a party. And Madeline Brown says, and she's has okay, she would know because she was LBJ's mistress, what he said to her. She would know. And she says that and she's been very consistent with her testimony. I think she's dead now, but she's very consistent. He said when he came out of that meeting with all those sweet eight effers at that party, she said he whispered in her ear, "After tomorrow, those Kennedy sons of bitches will never embarrass me again." That's no threat. That's a promise. And she remembered it because he said it twice, and then he called her next morning, said the same thing. So, you know, uh, and you listen. I've read her book, and I've also listened to her, and she has a good memory for who was there. And the reason she remembers who was there is because she knew all these people on a first name basis. She was at all the social functions. She was a regular attendee. A lot of them happened at the Adolphus Hotel downtown Dallas, but this one had to be at the Murchison Mansion. And her list included the following people. And one name that you can go through that list there, and we've already done that, but one name I wanted to add to that list. There's a bunch more, believe it or not. I just couldn't fit it all in one slide. Some of the names aren't really relevant to this discussion. So, but one that was that Albert Thomas, that congressman that was on the plane when LBJ took the oath and winked at the new president. He was also a sweet eight effer. So, in addition to all these other people, and you see who's represented or what is represented by these individuals. And that's a point I really want to drive home, is the fact that this deep state is not an amorphous, nameless, faceless blob. It's made up of real people. And here are the real people that represent these different agencies or entities within this deep state uh, structure. You got Washington represented, you got the state of Texas, you got Dallas with the mayor there, you got the FBI there, you got state and local law enforcement, you got organized crime there, the CIA's there, all the big business folks are there. LBJ has three of the four people that make up his little inner circle that carried out all those murders are there, including Mac Wallace. And so, after the assassination, Madeline Brown confronted LBJ and said, you got to tell me, were you involved with this? And he told her, the people that I know, the oil people, the CIA, they did it. And so clearly, uh, as far as means and opportunity is concerned, just those anecdotes alone gives at least some indication that LBJ was involved, and not just on his own behalf, but on the behalf of a larger cabal of traitors. And then you get into who had more control of the field of operations than LBJ, and it's clearly there's nobody. Uh, he had intersecting relationships with so many different people, including John Connally, the governor. And of course, Connolly's going to be instrumental in getting JFK down to Texas and to Dallas Pacific. He's instrumental in setting up the speech at the Trademark instead of the Women's Building, which is what the JFK people. That picture on the top left is the Trademark. You can see all the catwalks. There's like 50 some entrances into that building. You couldn't guard them all. It's a huge building. You got catwalks, and they even extend higher than what that picture shows. It'd be very easy for a sniper to take out somebody standing down on the ground floor giving a speech. The women's building was safe, smaller. There were no catwalks, and there was basically two entrances, one for the people and the other for the car. You could actually drive the car right into the building, so it's defendable. Connally was instrumental in getting Kennedy into that facility, the Trademark, where of course he never ended up there, but because ultimately what we have found out is there were 3 or 4 locations in Dallas to take him out. One was at the airport, one was at Dealey Plaza, one was at the Trademark. So if they don't get him at Dealey, they'd have got him at the Trademark. And you see, just by looking at that picture, you see the speaker down there at the lectern, right smack in the middle of that picture. What a a clear line of sight that would be for somebody high up in a catwalk. Anyway, Connolly, he had an intersecting relationship with Connolly. He had a very close relationship with John Rowley, who's head of the Secret Service. And the Secret Service, as we're going to find out, has a lot of motive to want to get JFK out. A lot of it is cultural and social, but they don't like JFK. And Rowley's in tight with LBJ, who's going to be his new boss if he's the new president. And uh, we see the Secret Service covering up almost as much as the CIA after the assassination. Makes you wonder what they had to hide. So, but the intersecting relationship is the important thing. Uh, LBJ had a relationship with Connolly, had a relationship with Rowley. You don't have to contaminate the entire Secret Service, just the bosses, just the boss. And then he gives orders and everybody follows orders. He has a relationship with the mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabal, who turns out to also have a relationship with the CIA. So we find out years later he was a CIA guy. He was an asset, a paid asset. Uh, and of course, he's the guy that changed the motorcade route, bringing it, past the Texas School Book Depository onto 290-degree turns, right in front of the grassy knoll. He has a relationship with Bill Moyers is the guy that was responsible, many people believe, for having the bubble top removed. He has a relationship with Dryholes Bird, who owns the Texas School Book Depository. He has a relationship with the mechanics. We found Mac Wallace's fingerprint in the Texas School Book Depository sniper's nest. We watched on television as Jack Ruby killed Lee Oswald. And of course, Lee Harvey Oswald paid the ultimate price for being the alleged assassin. So, to the extent all of these, what they did and how they did it, and et cetera, that's up for discussion. But they were definitely involved in some manner, shape, form. And LBJ has a relationship with Mac Wallace, certainly, who has a relationship by extension with Ruby and Oswald. And then the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, the Dallas Police, by virtue of the fact that they take orders from the mayor and they do what the mayor tells you. He's the executive of the Dallas Police in particular, the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, not so much. But the fact that LBJ has a relationship with Mayor Cabal, and that means the Dallas Police are going to carry out whatever LBJ and Cabal want them to carry out. And of course, we see all kinds of hanky panky by the Dallas Police and the Dallas County Sheriff's Department. And then, of course, another intersecting relationship was J. Edgar Hoover. They're neighbors, they're friends. So the FBI is in the pocket of LBJ as well. And so, as far as the field of operations, which is Dallas, nobody has more control over that field of operations than LBJ does. Then, if you expand it out to Washington, after the assassination, he moves to Washington, where the investigation is going to take place. They're going to take it out of Dallas's hands and put it in the hands of Washington, where it can be controlled. They're on site. I mean, he's in charge of Air Force One. We learned yesterday that it won't even take off without the say-so of the president. And he didn't have to be sworn in, but he wanted to be, so that picture would go out in all the newspapers and with Jackie stand next to me and give legitimacy to the new government. He's in charge of that. He's the one that made Jackie show up. Jackie didn't want to be there. He said, "Yes, I want you here. You have to be here." And then immediately, the narrative starts going out from Air Force One on the return flight before any investigation has started taking place at all. He's already the word is going out from Air Force One, and then when they get back to Washington, it goes out from the Situation Room that Lee Harvey Oswald is the lone gunman. And on board Air Force One is JFK's body, which is being illegally stolen from the state of Texas, where the autopsy is supposed to take place and taken to. This is one of the things that LBJ understood from all of his previous experience having committed murder, is that you better control the medical examiner, the autopsy, because if you don't, that physical evidence might not jive with the narrative. And in order to make it jive, you've got to have control over that autopsy. And so he transports the body to a place where he can control the autopsy back in Bethesda. Military doctors have never performed a gunshot autopsy. And all these military generals etc., are in the room directing the autopsy, giving orders. They burn their notes afterwards. So there's no real-time record of what they actually saw. It's all concocted later. And Pentagon, like Curtis LeMay was there. What's Curtis LeMay doing in the autopsy? He was there, smoking a cigar, a victory cigar. Uh, then the FBI investigation, all of the evidence that is being shared with the public from J. Edgar Hoover on. J. Edgar Hoover announces in a memo almost immediately that the uh, the assassination was the work of a lone gunman. And then all of the evidence that flowed from that point out was meant to buttress his original statement. And of course, he's friends with LBJ, and they're communicating back and forth on a daily basis almost. And that whatever evidence comes to the Warren Commission is filtered through first J. Edgar Hoover, which means it's being filtered by LBJ as well, and then eventually filtered again by Allen Dulles. And so, why are we surprised that the Warren Commission was a hoax? Why are we surprised that it was a cover up? That was the whole point of it. And LBJ is in control of both, right? He's friends with J. Edgar Hoover. They've both stated publicly, which means their credibility is on the line, that it's already a lone gunman. It's already open shut case. And he picked all the Warren Commission members and specifically put Allen Dulles on the Warren Commission to protect the CIA. So he's, by virtue of who he put, or his power to select a commission and who he put on the commission, he's in charge of the commission. It's his commission. It's his blue ribbon commission. And then by virtue of the fact he has this relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, and they both put their name in the line, their credibility in the line, stating already in advance that it was a lone gunman, he's controlling the investigation. They start with a conclusion, they work backwards. The CIA, acting on Allen Dulles' instructions, no doubt, and using people like disinformation expert David Atlee Phillips down in Mexico City, concoct this wild story about Lee Harvey Oswald going to Mexico City. Everybody knew it was bullshit. Even Hoover knew it, told Johnson that, but doesn't stop it from getting out and being included in the Warren Commission as evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald. Even though the voices didn't match, the pictures didn't match, it wasn't the same guy. It was a doppelganger. But again, this is all in an effort to muddy up the truth and point everybody in a direction of a narrative that has already been started. It started on Air Force One with LBJ. It started with the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover. And, it famously, remember the assistant attorney general come out and said, this memo was never supposed to see the light of day. He wrote a memos, intra-office memos, stating the purpose of the Warren Commission, which is basically we need to convince the American public that Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone gunman and would have been convicted at a court of law. It's all a sales job. That's all it is. And it's coming straight out of the Oval Office. And then the diversion of the state funeral. It was LBJ who decided we're going to have a state, he's the president. He makes these decisions. We're going to have a state funeral. And on the day that we're having the state funeral, when all eyes are on Washington, the television channel, everybody's in the nation is watching this. We're so awestruck by the grief that's still still hanging in the air. Now, all the ceremony and the splendor, etc. And at the same time that's happening, we'll take out the Patsy back in Dallas. It's all engineered like he's like a director of a movie, a producer of a movie. So no one else had these intersecting relationships with all the people back in Texas and the power over all the infrastructure and the agencies and all the goings on in Washington. Nobody else had that power than the president. And of course, the new president's LBJ. So if you are in this cabal and you are looking for immunity, or if you're looking for a way to control the investigation, a way to control the narrative, set the narrative, if you're looking for a way to carry out this plot in a location that's favorable to you, and carry out this plot that in a way that you have immunity, and none of the people involved in it will ever get caught. You have to secure the involvement of the future president. You have to. And if he has motive, then it's not going to be hard, right? Because he is as eager to get JFK out of the way as you are. And so it's not a hard sell. It's not a difficult sell. So then you look at the patterns of all these murders that, according to Billy Solestis, LBJ's been involved in. And I listed them here. You start with Kinzer, which, remember, he was trying to blackmail, the love triangle going, but he was also trying to blackmail LBJ. He was taking out 51. And then Marshall, 61. Josepha, 61. Josepha, by the way, is LBJ's sister. Unbelievable. George Krutulak, 62. Coleman Wade, 62. Harold Orr, 63. JFK, 63. And according to Billy Celestis, there's two more, Ike Rogers and his secretary. Now, he stipulates, these are the ones I'm aware of. There may have been others, but these are the ones I'm aware of personally. They were carried out by Mac Wallace, acting on the instructions of LBJ. And they're all consistent with the exception of JFK. All the others involved a blow to the head and carbon monoxide poisoning. And that's how Mac Wallace killed people. That was his preferred method, to make it look like suicide. And the majority of these were ruled suicides. So many synchronicities. The motives in all of these were the same: to cover up LBJ's criminal past, all his crimes, to help his political career continue to ascend. The means, he's got these attorneys that are helping. Ed Clark is the one that introduced Mac Wallace to him to begin with. John Cofer was the one that represented Malcolm Wallace in the Murder One trial. Cliff Carter was the fixer. These guys helped. And of course, they had attorney-client privilege, so they could plan all these things and never have to testify. He's got at his disposal his own personal hitman who owes him his life. He's got all the big oil cash he could ever need or want from Hunt, Murchison, Sid Richardson, Byrd, etc. And as the president now, as the most prominent politician from the state of Texas prior to becoming president of the United States, he controls both Texas and the United States. He controls law enforcement of all the state, local, and federal. He controls the investigations. He's the one that tied off the investigations and won, right? Warren Commission. He controlled the local coroner's office, which is how he got all these ruled suicides. And then when it gets to JFK, he just controls it another way by transporting the body to Bethesda and having the military control. Of course, the military was involved. The Pentagon was involved in this. So it's just by proxy, he controlled the autopsy of JFK. And we've seen how he's controlled all these judges, to the extent where one of his bought and paid for judges in Texas released a felony murder one convicted Malcolm Wallace and suspended a 5-year sentence when the jury was debating between execution and life imprisonment. And he just released him because he was a bought and paid for judge. He controls all of this. So he has the means in all of these. And of course, the common denominator in each one of these victims is they're all tied to LBJ, so clearly has the opportunity. So some anecdotes that show, you use your imagination, your own determination what they show. But there was according to Jackie, there was a heated argument in the hotel room before the motorcade between Kennedy and LBJ. LBJ was trying to prevail upon Kennedy to switch cars, or to have Connally switch cars. Connally, he wanted him to ride with him a couple cars back. He wanted his enemy, Senator Ralph Yarborough, to ride the same car. He called it the death car. He wanted him to ride in the car with JFK because he knew what was fixing to happen. Or at least you could make the case that he knew what was going to happen. You could also make the case that Connally didn't. Connally knew the little bit of information he had to know. He didn't know all the plot. And so he was eager to ride in the car with JFK. His best friend wasn't so eager because he knew that car was fixing to come under a hail of bullets And of course, he did end up getting shot, almost died. So it shows pre-knowledge there on the part of LBJ and a little bit of foreknowledge, actually. Then we talked about the wink from Albert Thomas. I did cover that yesterday. There you see a picture of it, right after he took his oath of office. And of course, remember now, he's one of these sweet 8Fers. So all of their plans, starting back when LBJ was a lowly congressman, and then he got bumps up and helps through a lot of help with some of these sweet 8Fers. He steals the election 48, becomes a senator. He just works his way up, and he becomes basically the most powerful man in America as the majority leader of the Senate. All these spending bills have to have his signature. He gets to decide who gets what money. And so he's very powerful. When he becomes vice president, everybody says, well, that's a step down. He never relinquished his power over the Senate when he became vice president. He just used his bagman, Bobby Baker, secretary of the Senate, to run it for him. And so the power went with him. Remember, he said, power is where power goes. And eventually, now he's president. And so their investment in this guy and helping him all the way through his career has now paid off. And in a very brief instant, an unguarded moment, when LBJ turns and looks at Albert Thomas, there's this mutual, yeah, we did it. And you can see LBJ smiling. Albert Thomas is smiling and winking. And a photographer caught it. And look at all the people that are smiling in that picture. You got LBJ and his wife, Lady Bird, who must be a crazy woman or so. She's smiling. In other pictures, she's showing her teeth. She's laughing. She's joyful in this moment. And I have to think she was in on it. And then Albert Thomas smiling and winking. And then you look at Jackie and she's traumatized. So 4 people in that picture, 3 of them in the LBJ circle are happy as clams. The 4th one, the one in the JFK circle, is traumatized. And that's really where the whole nation is at this point. They're where Jackie is. But all the sweet 8Fers, all the deep staters are where LBJ is. Isn't that interesting? I told the story of Brigadier General Godfrey McHugh. I don't have to review that. I also told the story of Leo Janus, the speechwriter and friend, who in 73, when LBJ was dying, when you're dying, you have this urge to unburden yourself. And LBJ did. He confirmed that he never believed Oswald acted alone. He always believed there was a conspiracy. And then he went on to say that we have been running a goddamn murder incorporated in the government. And 73 is right before 75 when the church hearings happened. Church hearings confirmed exactly what LBJ said in 73 on his deathbed. We had been running a goddamn murder incorporated. And I think what he was talking about was maybe, the deep state in general and all the goings on as far as the CIA was concerned and the assassination programs, things like that. Or maybe he was talking about himself and he's unburdening himself from all the murders that the blood on his hands. I don't know. We'll never know. But certainly he was talking about capital murder here. And when he said people just automatically assume he's talking about the government. Well, it could be he and his little sweet 8F conspiracy group, which according to Billy Celeste is a small 4 people. LBJ, Cliff Carter, Billy Celeste, and Mac Wallace, the hitman. I don't know. I don't know if he's talking about the government or himself, but he said it. And then we had the deathbed confession, another unburdening of guilt by E. Howard Hunt. This happened years later, 2004. Now, the backstory to this is that E. Howard Hunt had denied vehemently, even taken to court people who linked his name to any involvement in Dallas. He eventually lost in court, the appeals process. The court actually came. This is the only jury that had a chance to basically issue a judgment as to culpability in the JFK assassination. And there was one in New Orleans, and there was this one. One was a criminal trial of Clay Shaw. It's the famous Jim Garrison trial. We found out later that the CIA rat fucked the hell out of that trial, infiltrated Jim Garrison's staff, and blew it up from within. because it was only 4 years after the fact, and they couldn't afford to have one of their assets go down. We found out later Clay Shaw was an asset. In fact, he was CIA's most important man in New Orleans. Denied it, denied it, denied it. The entire time lied. Again, the CIA lied. Imagine that. But by the time we get to the 80s, the civil trial, where E. Howard Hunt is denying any involvement, Mark Lane, the attorney, finds Maria Lorenz, and Maria Lorenz testifies on the stand. Not only did she know E. Howard Hunt, they were both involved in Operation 40. She took a trip with Frank Sturgis and Lee Harvey Oswald and several others. And from Miami to New Orleans or to Dallas the day before the assassination to run guns to Dallas. She didn't know what the purpose of running guns to Dallas. Normally it was coming the other direction from Dallas to Miami on its way to Cuba. But this time they're running into Dallas, and she knew it was a big operation with several cars. And they drove all night. When they get there, who meets them at the hotel? E. Howard Hunt. He pays off Frank Sturgis. She realizes this is a bigger operation than she was planning, and so she begged out. Uh, Jack Ruby came to the door while they were in the hotel room, got mad that she was there. What's this woman doing here? Anyway, she begged off and she left. But then afterwards, the next day, JFK is killed. And Sturgis told her later, after he sort of bragged to her about how we killed the president that day. It was all set up. You could have been part of history, but you left. It was all set up, all neat, all handled, no press, no investigation. It was all beautiful. And and she told the FBI that when they asked her, and they said, "Well, that's a CIA matter. So if it's a CIA matter, we don't care." And so anyway, in '84, she testifies to that, and by that time, more evidence had come out corroborated her story that E. Howard Hunt was part of a CIA hit on JFK in Dallas, and he lost the case. And when they interviewed the foreman person on the jury, Leslie Armstrong, the foreperson said, "We believe without a shadow of a doubt that the CIA and E. Howard Hunt killed JFK." So, but he still, that was in the '80s, he still continued to deny it for the next 20 years. And then Watergate had happened, and he had been disgraced, and went to prison for a short time. And by that time, the CIA started washing their hands of him, and they had already killed his wife because she was blackmailing the Nixon White House after Watergate, and when she wasn't getting what she wanted, she was about ready to go public, so they killed her in a plane crash. Dorothy Hunt, read that story sometime, and then they sold him out after he all these years had been the faithful soldier, kept quiet. So by the time we get to 2004, he's on his deathbed. I guess he just figured, what's the use? What's the point staying quiet anymore? And they ruined my life. So he comes out and admits to his son St. John and to a writer named Eric Hamburg that he was a bench warmer in, quote, the big event in Dallas. He was one of the overseers and was a stand-in if they needed. And some people had thought he was Tramp C, which is the third tramp. It wasn't him, it was Chauncey Holt. But according to E. Howard Hunt in 2004, when he gave this confession, he jotted down on a 3x5 card what you see here under his picture, LBJ being at the top of the plot. And then there's the CIA element, Cord Meyer, Bill Harvey, responsible for all the personnel and the planning of the assassination. And of course, Harvey was, anything you see Harvey's name attached to is going to result in an assassination. And David Morales was one of the shooters. And then he had one of the shooters on the grassy knoll. And he had him listed as a French gunman. The grassy knoll was where the French gunman was. Don't believe the French gunman was in Dallas, and I don't believe. But I mean, I don't know that, right? I have evidence I think is pretty convincing who was on the grassy knoll, and I don't believe it was French gunman. But nevertheless, we know there was a shooter on the grassy knoll behind the picket fence. So now as president, here's the famous picture, 99 minutes after the assassination, there's the crowded Air Force One. I don't know if it's a lobby or a conference room, what it was, but now as president, he is the most powerful man in the world. And now his dreams have been realized, at least politically, and now all his legal problems are behind him. So now he is free and clear to pony up and deliver for all the people that wanted him in that position. He's free to, and of course, as part of his new function, he's going to have to cover up and provide immunity for all these people. So that's what comes next. And this is the one document that I neglected to uh, give you the name of the person who authored it. Uh, and it's National Security Action number 273, which he signed 2 days after JFK's funeral. I understand that in October, the same author of this memo had authored National Security Action Memo 263, McGeorge Bundy, who was Kennedy's national security advisor. I think this calls into question McGeorge Bundy's motivations. I mean, seriously. Because in October, he writes a memo that calls for a withdrawal from Vietnam, which is what Kennedy wanted. Kennedy signed it. And then a month later, he draws up a new memo which completely contradicts it. It calls for an expansion of the Vietnam War policy. And he draws this up the day before JFK goes to Dallas. But he obviously had to know that somebody else would be in the position to sign this. It wouldn't be Kennedy. Why would Kennedy reverse himself within a 30-day period? It's not going to happen. So it's as if he knew, I'm going to draw this up and have it ready for the new guy to sign to countermand what Kennedy signed 30 days ago. He's the original author of National Security Action Memo 263. So he certainly knows what it said because he wrote it. And now he writes another one, complete opposite, within 30-day period. This is the same guy that called off the air attack against Castro's 3 remaining jets the night before Bay of Pigs. This is crucial. This is one of the reasons why the CIA was so mad at Kennedy when the air support got called off. They assumed it was Kennedy. We trace back the order, and it goes to McGeorge Bundy. He's the one who gave the order from the White House. We don't need to worry about his 3 remaining jets. They're not going to be able to stop what's coming. Of course, they did stop what was coming. And an argument could be made that George Bundy was working against his boss from, that action in Cuba happened a couple months into President Kennedy's first term. So an argument could be made. It'd be a great study about McGeorge Bundy's motivations, whether or not he was working with, for, or against his boss, starting with Bay of Pigs and continuing through National Security Action Number 273. And that decision to call off that air support, caused the disaster at Bay of Pigs, which is what the CIA, they weren't altogether unhappy with the disaster. It was planned to fail. But what was supposed to occur was that Kennedy would give in, just like Eisenhower had, and send the military in to back up the CIA action once he realized it was going to fail otherwise. Eisenhower always did. They didn't count on the fact that Kennedy would stand strong and say no. McGeorge Bundy's actions was helpful in making this CIA action fail. And they thought it would force JFK's hand. It just didn't. But from that point forward, the CIA and the president were at war with one another. And then it extended to the Cubans as well. So it really put the JFK administration on the defensive right from the start, under attack from the intelligence agencies. And McGeorge Bundy's the reason it happened the way it happened. And then this National Security Action Memo. So like I said, it calls into question McGeorge Bundy's motivations. And of course, we know what happened. Once that memo was signed, the National Security Action Memo, it provoked the so-called Gulf of Tonkin, which we now know is another false flag. We know that it was in the long tradition of false flags, starting with the USS Maine and Lusitania and Pearl Harbor. Now we got Gulf of Tonkin, all of which ended up in wars. And so the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which was the outcome of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, was the document by which we fought the entire Vietnam War. It was the Vietnam War. So by signing National Security Act Number 273, that was essentially signing our involvement in the Vietnam War, which is that's the payoff. Remember, the CIA wants this war. It was a CIA war. Pentagon wants this war. Another payoff, immediately after the assassination, LBJ renewed the oil depletion allowance set at 27.5%. All his oil people back home can breathe a sigh of relief. He also, the Kennedy Act just sort of just disappears now. So they can hide as much money they want overseas bank accounts, never worried about paying taxes. And so that was worth $300 million a year to all his oil supporters back home. And, you know, I've kind of gone through and just broke it down by different conspirators, what the payoffs were in the military intelligence communities. J. Edgar Hoover is appointed FBI director for life after having to fight for his job all the time with the Kennedys. They're always trying to retire him. His best friend appoints him FBI director for life. Payoff for J. Edgar. The S Force, which was Nixon, got covered up. You want to know more about the S Force? I did a series of videos on that. That was the assassination squad that was training in Mexico how to hit a moving target from distance with high-powered rifles and scopes. That's exactly what happened to Dallas. Ironically, or not, Nixon was in Dallas, November 22nd. The JFK war against the CIA ended. National Security Action Memo 273 was signed, which produced the Vietnam War, which was big money to the intelligence community. It was a CIA war, which means the Cold War is back on. In the second term, JFK was going to try to end the Cold War. Now, it's back on full steam ahead with the Vietnam War. And all the back channels that Kennedy was working with, Khrushchev and Castro, they all ended. So if you're the military intelligence community, you got a huge payoff as a result of Dallas. The Texas oilmen, we already talked about what their payoffs were. The Cuban Americans who were hot to trot to get Castro out of power, they didn't get that. Hot to trot to assassinate Castro, they didn't get that either. But they did get an end to the back channel, which would have normalized relations between the United States and Cuba. And they did get revenge for all of JFK's betrayals, which I go into I'll be going in detail about those later when we get to the Cubans. The mafia got revenge for being double crossed. There are people in this world you can double cross. The mafia is not one of them. And that includes Jimmy Hoffa, who was part and parcel with organized crime. He'd been sent to prison by Bobby, and now JFK is out, which means Bobby's out. The old saying by Carlos Marcello: if you cut off the tail of the dog, the dog will continue to bite you. But if you cut off the head, the dog ceases to be a problem. So that was the decision by the mob to go along with a hit on Kennedy, JFK, instead of Bobby. You kill Bobby, you still got to deal with Jack, who's the president. He's going to move heaven and earth to find out who killed his brother. But if you kill the president, Bobby, who gets his power, derives all his power from the president. His power, he's neutered like a dog. And that's exactly what happened with Bobby. And they got an end of all the Justice Department anti-racketeering harassment. All the Bobby-led mafia crusade went away. LBJ got his payoffs. All his legal problems went away. He's now the president. And the Secret Service is going to get payoffs. The moral degenerate that they couldn't stand protecting, JFK, is now out of office. He's gone. James Rowley, who's got this friendship like J. Edgar Hoover with LBJ, becomes LBJ's personal protector. Never leaves his side during his entire presidency. Thomas Kelly, who was sent to Dallas to engineer and begin crafting the narrative of lone gunmen, including getting the doctors to change their stories, etc. He becomes the Secret Service liaison to the Warren Commission. And his job there was to whitewash any Secret Service role, which worked. And you don't see anything in the Warren Commission about Secret Service involvement. They weren't really happy with some of the protocols that were violated, but And then Emory Roberts ends up serving as LBJ's personal secretary. And Emory Roberts was in charge of the whole Dallas thing. So there were payoffs when LBJ became president for all these different conspirators. And no other person or entity has the capacity to make all these payoffs than the new president and LBJ. And then the second part, not only does he have to pony up, he has to cover up. And so that's when we get into the Warren Commission. And I think I did a fairly decent job yesterday. This was a an effort to quote avoid parallel investigation. In other words, we don't want any investigations by a body that we don't control. So we're gonna create this blue ribbon commission to satisfy the American people that Lee Harvey Oswald worked alone, and he would have been convicted in a court of law if he'd lived. And of course, one of the ways that you rig these things is the rules that you establish around it. In this case, there was no publicity, no transcripts allowed to leak to the public. They're all classified. Press couldn't be involved, be given access. And so it was all done in secret behind closed doors. And then the second way you do it is by whom you put on this commission. It's clearly a cover up. There was not one Kennedy defender on this commission. You put two Republicans and two Democrats, people say, well, there you go. You got two Democrats, but they're Southern Democrats. These are not folks that are loyal or have any affinity with a Northeastern liberal. They didn't like Kennedy. And then you got the military heavily represented. And then you got the token, which is basically just the face. That's Warren, Earl Warren. He's hardly ever there. He was the de facto head, so they could call it the Warren Report, but he didn't run it. Alan Dulles ran it. Look at the backgrounds of all these people. These are all military or CIA, and this is about as deep state as you can get. So you've got a deep state plot to take out the president, and now you have an investigation that's made up of deep staters. What the hell do you think they're going to say? Especially when you put Alan Dulles, former director of the CIA, guy who got fired by JFK, and he's in charge of it basically. Included as member on this committee is John McCloy. I mean, this is the guy who shared a box with Hitler in Berlin at the 36 Olympics. When he was confronted with the fact that Auschwitz was literally murdering millions of Jews, we controlled the skies at this point of the war. We could have bombed the rail lines, shut down Auschwitz tomorrow. And he resisted it. He opposed it. He wouldn't allow it. And some suspect that he wouldn't allow it because he didn't want evidence to be collected. It could be used against his old pal Hitler after the war. Nobody knew Hitler was going to commit suicide at that point. And of course, then during World War II, we set up internment camps out in California for all Japanese Americans. And afterwards, there was some guilt about that. And this was years and years later. And in the discussion about reparations, because these were American citizens, he opposed the reparations. So this is not a civil libertarian. This is not a humanitarian guy we're talking about. He has a lot of connections to fascists, actually. He's on this committee. Another guy that's on this, this is the figurehead, Earl Warren. Earl Warren, notwithstanding his status as Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, before that he'd been governor of California, and he's the guy who implemented the internment policy out in California. And an argument could be made about internment, whether it was right or wrong or moral or immoral, whatever. It was war. There's a fog, right? But he seized the property of all these Japanese Americans who got sent to these camps and gave it to his political supporters. And it's just outright theft. And this guy is the namesake of this commission. He's put in charge of this commission. But the guy who really ran it was Alan Dulles. I don't have to go into a long diatribe about Alan Dulles. I've already done that. I've built this case. But this is a guy that's already responsible for many people dying, including assassinations of foreign leaders. Executive action happened on his watch. Zia Rifle happened on his watch. These are assassination programs. Operation Phoenix, tens of thousands of Vietnamese died. And This guy, he started MK Ultra. He's a bad guy, and he's committed treason. I don't know how many times at this point, and he doesn't listen. Remember Eisenhower said about Dulles? He says, "I've tried to talk to him, he don't listen to me." Eisenhower couldn't control Dulles. He was an out of control CIA director. He was rogue, and he was creating a rogue agency in his image. And this is the guy that got fired by JFK after Bay of Pigs, and then volunteered. He didn't wait to be asked to be on the Warren Commission. He volunteered for it. He lobbied for it. He's the only one of these guys didn't have a job. He didn't have a full-time job. And so this was going to be his full-time job. He never missed a meeting. And even Earl Warren, he's the one that nicknamed it the Dulles Commission. He said should have been called the Dulles Commission. He really ran it. I didn't. And his job was to act as another buffer, just like JFK was insulating FBI from any culpability. Allen Dulles was insulating the CIA, and both were pointing everybody in the direction of the lone gunman. So, and of course, we already learned J. Edgar Hoover has this personal relationship with LBJ, and LBJ appointed Allen Dulles. So there's those intersecting relationships again. So uh, clearly, I hope it's clear anyway, it is to me, that there's no one else who benefited more from the assassination of JFK than LBJ did. And there's no one else whose intersecting relationships with all things coming out of Dallas, like the Sweet Eight effers, and these Washington bureaucrats, these deep staters in Washington, no one else who had these intersecting relationships whose cronies benefited as much as LBJ's cronies did. So that's one of the things I look for when I'm trying to trace blame or assign blame. I try to determine who benefited. They asked that crime, they asked that question in the JFK movie, those three questions. Who was, uh, the second question was who benefited, and then who had the power to cover it up? Who who had the motive, who benefited, who had the power to cover it up? The answer to all three of those questions is LBJ. It's LBJ. So uh, what I've hoped to have done so far, and we're not through all of it, but we're through with the LBJ section, is to demonstrate that this deep state is not an amorphous, nameless, faceless blob. It's made up of people. There's names, and these people make decisions. They make choices. They have interests. They have selfish interests. And when somebody stands up and blocks those interests or stands in the way as an obstacle, it's clear as you look back through history, even if it predates, this same deep state cabal tried to get rid of FDR because he was standing in their way. They tried to overthrow his government. And so this isn't the first time. It's the first time it succeeded in such a dramatic fashion. But it's just a simple matter. They had interests that were being blocked by one person. And this one person was going to be a continuing threat. He wasn't a temporary threat. The fact that his brothers were in line to be president after him indicated that he would be a continuing problem going forward. He was going to cost them money. He was going to cost them power. He was going to, his people were going to go to jail, including LBJ. I won't relitigate it all, but no one had more motive and no one benefited more and no one caused his cronies to benefit more than LBJ as a result of what happened in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. That's the deep state blob, but I've given you names of people that were in that deep state. I've given you some. I haven't given you all, but I've given you some. And that's how you personalize and you hold accountable people for the decisions of entities. You get past the agency name, or you get past the fog of of bureaucracy, and you get down to the actual people who hold those positions of power and the decisions that they made. Like George Bundy, for example, he I've not seen a lot of research on him. I'd be very interested to find out what his motives were and what payoffs might have come his way as a result of November 22nd, 1963. All right, that's enough for today. Thank you for listening. This is the Addendum, Chapter 41. And until next time, God bless.